Hey, welcome back. So in this lecture, let's understand about strings. A string is nothing but collection of characters. Please note that a string must be terminated by a null character. So when collection of characters are terminated by a null character, then that is called as a string. So a null character is used to indicate end of a string. Example, your name is collection of characters and can be represented as a string in a program. So we can use an array to store strings. So unlike C++, Java and Python, C does not have any dedicated data type to store a string data. So in C, we take the help of an array to store and manipulate string data. So string manipulations are realized through arrays in C. Let's learn how to store a string. For instance, this is an example of a string. So this is a message, hello, which is written inside the double quotes. So this is a string. So this is how a string is written in the program. Now, how do you store this in a program? Very simple, create an array. So array of type char. Why? Because string is collection of characters. So now let's create an array. Char message is equal to hello. So this is how you store a string in the program using an array. So now here you can see that this is an array variable, right? Or you can also call it as a pointer or a reference. Or in this case, you can also call it as a string variable. This also can be called as a string variable for this context. So when you do this, compiler will reserve some bytes of memory and it will store the string. So how this will be stored in the memory? Very simple. So let's say there are some memory location addresses. Let's say E00, E01, E02, E03, E04, E05, and H is stored here. That is the ASCII code of H. E will be stored here. L will be stored here. This is a place for O. And after that, please note that the compiler will automatically insert the null character to indicate the end of string. A null character. So the ASCII code for the null character is 0. So 0 means a null character. And the null character is also denoted by \0. So you represent new line as \n, right? In the same way, \0 is to denote a null character in the program. So \0. So this is how the string hello is stored in the memory, and this is a reference, okay, message. So that means this string definition consumed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bytes in memory. Not 5 bytes, okay. The required information is 5 bytes, right? But this definition actually consumes 6 bytes in memory because compiler terminates this string by a null character. You need not to insert any null character. The compiler automatically inserts that. Alright, so now we know that how to store a string in a program using character array. There is also one more method to store a string, okay, so which is a little complicated method, but let's cover that also for the sake of coverage. So you can also initialize this array with a string like this. So let me create a variable message. So you can also initialize something like this. So let's open the curly braces. Like you can initialize this array byte by byte like this. H, comma, E, comma, L, comma, L, comma, O, and close this. If you do this, then this is not a string, okay? Remember that. Why? Because here you are just storing some character data into a character array, right? So this is not terminated with a null character. So that's why this cannot be considered as a string definition, remember. So this is not a string definition. So this is a perfect example for string definition. Why? Because here a string is properly terminated with a null character. So if you are doing string manipulation, then you should not use this method actually. Or if you want to use this method, then you have to manually write the null character at the end. For example, here you should write the null character manually and then you finish the initialization. Now these two are identical. So otherwise these two are not identical. So that's why if you want to do string manipulation, then this is kind of little complicated method, so don't use it. So always go for this. So now what is the difference between this definition and this definition? So here there is actually an array of 10 data items, right? So in this case, you actually have partially initialized this array, right? So this array is capable of storing 10 items, but you have stored 5 plus 1, 6 items. So this is a partial initialization. So rest of the bytes will be zeros, right? Or null character. So the memory looks something like this: HELLO, null character, that is 0, null character, like that. So but in this case, the compiler will dynamically tune the size of the array. So here the compiler will reserve only 6 bytes for this array. So that's the reason why we don't mention the number of data items when we store a string data using a character array. So here if you do size of message 1, it would give you 10 bytes, remember that. But if you do size of message 2, it would give you 6 bytes. So what if you do string length? So there is a built-in function called string length in the C standard library. So now if you use that function over, let's say, message 1, then it would give you 5 bytes, remember that. Because string length function always counts only the required information. So it doesn't count the null character. So that makes sense, isn't it? So actual length of our information is 5 bytes, right? So that's why string length always returns the length excluding the null character. So at the same time, if you do string length on message 2, what you get? So you again get 5 bytes. So later we can use string length in our program. So string length actually, it's a built-in function, comes from the string library of C standard library. So that's the introduction to strings, okay, how you store strings in your program. Let's continue our discussion on strings. Now let me write a simple string definition, something like this: char message is equal to A in double quotes. And let's write message, let me call it as message 1 or message 2, and char message 2 is equal to A in single quotes. Please note that this is called as a string definition. So this is a string. A is a string here, okay? It's not a character. And here A is a character. So that's how we differentiate between a string and a character. So here message 2 is a character variable which you created to store an ASCII code for a character. That's it. But in this case, you are storing a string in the string variable message 1. So the memory for this looks something like this. So let's say there is a memory allocation E00 where A will be stored, and 0 cross E01 where the null character will be stored. And this is a reference message 1. Whereas in this case, okay, so there will be, let's say one memory location, and the ASCII code of A will be stored, and this is, so which is actually the message 2. And in the next lecture, let's understand about one more string definition called string literal, okay, or string constant.